James Blunt is the man who somehow managed to be both the soundtrack to your heartbreak and the butt of your jokes at the same time. He's the soldier turned singer who went from army barracks to Grammy nominations, from war zones to wedding playlists. For a brief shining moment in the mid-2000s, he wasn't just famous, he was inescapable. His voice floated through radios, TV shows, supermarkets, and the back of every taxicab. And whether you loved him or loved to hate him, you knew James Blunt. But then came Ed Sheeran. And what happened next is one of those fascinating shifts in music history, when one sensitive guy with a guitar quietly hands the torch to another. Only the new guy takes that torch and builds an empire so massive, the original crown bearer can't even see the castle anymore. But here's the twist. James Blunt didn't exactly lose his throne. He walked off it. He stepped back. And that decision might just be the reason Ed Sheeran rose as high as he did. So let's rewind. Before the music, before the fame, before the memes, James Blunt was James Hillier Blount. That's right, Blount, not Blunt. Born into a comfortably posh British family, educated at Harrow, trained at Sandhurst, and destined for a solid, respectable military career. He served in the British Army, even posted to Kosovo as part of NATO peacekeeping forces. Imagine it. The same man who would one day sing tearjerkers in stadiums was once rolling through battle zones in tanks. Not your typical pop star origin story. But James had a different dream. He wanted music. And in 2004, he released his debut album, Back to Bedlam. At first, it barely made a ripple, and then the ripple became a tidal wave. You're Beautiful. That song that you could not escape. It didn't just climb the charts, it devoured them. #1 in the UK. #1 in America. #1 in practically every country with a radio station. It was the first British track in nearly a decade to top the Billboard Hot 100, and suddenly James Blunt was a global superstar. Back to Bedlam became the best-selling album of the 2000s in the UK. 15 million copies sold worldwide. A literal phenomenon. And here's the thing people conveniently forget. James wasn't a one-song wonder. Back to Bedlam had other hits too. Goodbye My Lover became the breakup ballad of choice, the kind of song people ugly cried to in their bedrooms. It was played at funerals, on TV dramas, even on Oprah. This wasn't background music. These were cultural moments. And the success didn't stop there. In 2007, James dropped All the Lost Souls with the single 1973, a nostalgic, shimmering track that went top 10 across Europe. In 2010, he pivoted with Stay the Night, a breezy, upbeat song that showed he could do sunny as well as moody. Then, in 2013, he had another global smash with Bonfire Heart, topping charts in Germany, Switzerland, Austria, and more. These were hits. Real hits. He was never just the You're Beautiful guy. But that song was so huge, so overwhelming, that it distorted the way the world remembered him. Still, James had carved out a space. He was the heartfelt ballad guy, the sensitive soldier with the guitar. And for a while, nobody else did it quite like him. Until Ed Sheeran showed up. Ed Sheeran didn't just step onto the scene, he steamrolled it. Where James had opened the door for vulnerable guitar-strumming male singers, Ed walked through and built an empire on the other side. He was younger, hungrier, and crucially, more relatable. James had the background of a posh army officer who married into aristocracy. Ed had the background of a scrappy busker, crashing on friends' couches, playing pubs, hustling his way into studio time. James looked like someone you'd see at a polo match. Ed looked like someone you'd see at Nando's. Guess which one the public found easier to project themselves onto. And here's where the comparisons get fascinating. James had You're Beautiful, the soaring, sentimental ballad that defined a decade. Ed had Shape of You, a juggernaut that blended pop, R&B, and acoustic guitar into one of the most streamed songs in history. James had Goodbye My Lover, the tear-soaked breakup anthem. Ed had Happier, a modern-day sobfest written with the same gut-punch sincerity, but with production slick enough to dominate playlists. Both men knew how to tug at heartstrings, but Ed managed to do it in a way that felt fresh, modern, and endlessly replayable. James was the blueprint. Ed became the update. Both men sang about heartbreak. Both men poured their souls into acoustic ballads. But while James's You're Beautiful became the song you secretly loved but publicly mocked, Ed's Thinking Out Loud and Perfect became untouchable classics. Songs people actually wanted at their weddings, at their first dances, at the most important moments of their lives. Where James was corny, Ed was cool. Where James became a meme, Ed became a megastar. And then there's the sheer scale of Sheeran's success. James Blunt is worth around $18 million today, more than enough to live like a king in Ibiza, which, spoiler, he does. But Ed Sheeran? Over $200 million. His Divide tour alone grossed over $775 million, making it the highest-grossing tour of all time. Ed didn't just have hits, he had juggernauts. The comparison is brutal. James filled arenas, Ed fills stadiums. James made millions, Ed made hundreds of millions. And yet, the dethroning wasn't entirely Ed's doing. James helped, because after those first few massive years, James stepped back. He kept making music, yes, but he didn't chase the spotlight with the same ferocity. He didn't flood the market with collabs. He didn't adapt to the streaming economy the way Ed did. And here's where James himself was brutally honest. In interviews, he admitted he already had enough fame, enough money, enough success. He said he didn't want more, that he was perfectly content with what he'd achieved. And when you step back in the music industry, someone else will step forward. Ed Sheeran didn't steal James's crown. James put it down and Ed picked it up. But here's where James gets the last laugh. Instead of desperately clawing for relevance, he reinvented himself. On Twitter, James Blunt became hilarious. The man who once made you groan with "You're Beautiful" suddenly became everyone's favorite snarky uncle. When someone tweeted that his music was awful, he'd reply, "Yes, but it bought me my house in Ibiza." When people mocked his voice, he'd clap back with brutal one-liners that trended for days. By leaning into the joke, James flipped the narrative. He went from cringy to cult favorite, from a punchline to the guy who owned the punchline. And life off stage? Pretty cushy. James bought a villa in Ibiza, turned it into a hotspot for celebrity parties, and married Sophia Wellesley, granddaughter of the Duke of Wellington. That's right, he literally married into aristocracy. Together, they're raising a family, sipping wine under the Mediterranean sun, and living a life most musicians only dream of after their peak. He still tours, still drops albums, still sells tickets. But he does it on his terms, at his pace, without chasing the relentless machine that Ed Sheeran thrives in. But still, you can't help but wonder, what if? What if James had leaned harder into streaming when it first took off? What if he'd collaborated with Rihanna, or Taylor Swift, or Justin Bieber? What if his timing had been 10 years later? Could he have been the Ed Sheeran of the 2000s? Could he have built the empire before Ed even arrived? Maybe. But maybe not. Because here's the truth. James never needed music the way Ed did. James already had privilege, education, and a career before music. Ed had nothing but his guitar and his grit. And in pop, hunger wins. So yes, Ed Sheeran dethroned James Blunt. Ed took the sound James helped popularize and turned it into global domination. But James walked away smiling. He's rich, he's happy, he's still performing, and he's still trolling the internet for fun. He may not have the empire, but he has the legacy, the songs, and the last laugh. And honestly, that might be the most beautiful ending of all.